My name is Lila, 27 years old, and on a bright spring morning in Dublin, I arrived 15 minutes early for an interview at Helios Systems. Shoes pinched, CV crisp, hope steady. The city had woken soft that morning, bathed in the kind of light that makes you believe everything will go right. I had ironed my blouse 3 times, polished the faint scuffs off my heels, and checked my bag twice before leaving. There was something sacred about the preparation. The way I pressed my hand against the folder that held my printed CV, my portfolio, and my hope. It was not just an interview. It was the culmination of quiet years spent studying at night, working by day, and rebuilding the pieces of myself that had been scattered long ago. When the bus turned the corner onto Marion Square, the glass building of Helios Systems rose ahead like a mirror to the sky. Its facade caught the sunlight so sharply it almost looked alive. I stepped off at the corner, the wind lifting the loose strands of my hair, and took a moment to breathe. I told myself, you belong here. Inside, the reception area smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Everything gleamed, white walls, chrome furniture, the hum of efficiency in the air. The receptionist was polite but distracted, typing fast, her eyes flicking between screens. When I gave my name, she frowned slightly and scrolled through a list. "I'm sorry," she said after a pause. "I don't see you here." Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried that familiar note of dismissal, the kind I'd known too many times before. I smiled anyway, that small professional smile that hides panic. "I was invited for the 10 o'clock slot," I said, and handed her my printed email confirmation. She glanced at it, nodded without much interest, and said she'd check with HR. I stepped aside, feeling the eyes of the other candidates brush over me. They were chatting softly. 2 men in dark suits and 1 woman with perfect posture, her leather folder balanced on her lap. They looked like they belonged. I tried to stand still, to appear calm, but inside my heart beat with the quiet ache of waiting. Minutes stretched. The receptionist's phone rang. She spoke in low tones, and then more candidates were called. "Second group, please follow me," she said, and they all rose, heels clicking, confidence in motion. I was left behind, standing beside a small, tired fern that leaned toward the sunlight with the same fragile hope that I felt. The silence around me grew thick. The fern's pot had a small crack near the rim. The leaves were brittle at the edges. I traced the line of dust on the counter, thinking of all the places where I had been told to wait, to prove myself twice. My reflection in the glass wall looked composed, gray blazer, subtle makeup, steady breath, but inside I was rehearsing my answers to every possible question. I was ready, and yet invisible. And then the air shifted. The door opened, and in walked Corinne. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. My sister, my own blood, stepped into that sunlit lobby as if she owned it. Her navy suit fit perfectly, the kind of tailored precision that money and timing buy. Her hair, always immaculate, was tied back, the same shade of chestnut as mine but neater, sharper. She saw me before I spoke. Her gaze flicked down, then up, assessing. "Lila," she said, her voice smooth, almost amused. "You're early." There was no hug. There hadn't been one in years. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, the subtle glint of her company badge catching the light. I remembered when we were girls, how she'd always walked 2 steps ahead, and I'd followed. But here, in that polished lobby, something deeper cut through the silence. "I didn't know you worked here," I said quietly. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile meant for boardrooms, not sisters. "New position," she said. "Strategy division." Her eyes flicked toward the receptionist, who immediately straightened, suddenly attentive. "We're running a joint interview today. Internal oversight." It took me a second to register what that meant. Joint interview. Internal oversight. Corinne wasn't here as a candidate. She was part of the panel.
My throat went dry.
She brushed past me, the faint scent of her perfume, something expensive, deliberate, lingering in the air. I watched her stride toward the elevator, her heels clicking a metronome of control. She turned slightly before the doors closed and said, "Try to relax, Lila. It's just business." I stood there, frozen, the sound of her words echoing long after she disappeared. The receptionist looked at me differently now, curious, cautious, maybe even sympathetic, but she said nothing. I sat back down beside the dying fern. Its leaves trembled slightly when the air conditioning shifted, as if even it knew tension had entered the room. I stared at it, that poor forgotten plant trying to live on stale air and limited light, and realized how much of myself I saw in it. 15 minutes early had turned into 40. My name still wasn't on the list. But I stayed seated, spine straight, eyes forward. I reminded myself of every night I had studied while Corinne was out celebrating another promotion, every small victory I had earned without applause. I wasn't here because of her. I was here in spite of her. When my name was finally called, it wasn't with ceremony or welcome, just a brief nod from a young assistant who didn't know the story behind the tension that hung in the air. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and followed him toward the elevator. The fern brushed my arm as I passed, brittle but still standing. That morning, I carried my CV, my quiet resolve, and the weight of old rivalry up those glass stairs. Behind me, Dublin shimmered in the window's reflection, alive and forgiving. Ahead of me, Corinne waited, with her navy suit, her colder eyes, and a history neither of us had ever truly escaped. The boardroom at Helios Systems was a cathedral of glass and light, the kind of room designed to impress, to make you feel small and visible all at once. From where I stood, I could see the skyline of Dublin reflected in the polished walls, the river winding faintly through the distance. The table was long, made of dark walnut, and surrounded by people who already knew one another's faces. Every chair seemed claimed before I entered, except one.
Mine.
It was placed deliberately, I realized, slightly off to the side near the window. Not part of the semicircle facing the interviewers, but not far enough to call out without seeming paranoid. Just far enough to be excluded politely. I felt the weight of it immediately, a spatial message disguised as coincidence. I smoothed the fabric of my blazer, smiled faintly, and sat down. The chair wobbled slightly, uneven on its leg. I steadied it, my palms flat against the cool wood of the table. Around me, the panel introduced themselves, people with crisp voices, polite nods, the soft rustle of papers and pens. Corinne sat opposite, her posture regal, her navy suit catching the light. She didn't look at me, not directly, but I could feel her awareness like static in the air. The first candidate began speaking. The questions flowed easily toward him about logistics, design principles, leadership structure. He answered confidently, his voice filling the room. Every time he spoke, the panel smiled, nodding, encouraging him. I kept my eyes forward, listening, learning the rhythm of the conversation. When it was finally my turn, I drew a breath and began. My answers were steady, my voice calm, each word chosen carefully, each idea anchored in the work I had done, the research I had prepared. I spoke about systems integration, about the modular framework I had designed for faster data syncs, about problem-solving under constraints. Then it happened, Corinne's laugh. Light, deliberate, slicing. "Oh, Lila," she said sweetly, "you've always been so ambitious." Her tone wrapped the word in velvet and thorns. "But that model you're describing, isn't it still in the testing phase? I'm just wondering if it's realistic to apply in a live environment yet." It wasn't a question. It was a trap disguised as concern. The others looked between us, curious, cautious. I kept my gaze fixed on her, my pulse steady though my skin burned. "The live test completed 2 weeks ago," I said evenly. "The results were documented in the packet provided." She smiled, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, right," she said, flipping through her papers theatrically. "I must have missed that." A few people chuckled under their breath. It wasn't cruel, just the kind of laugh people give when they don't want to pick sides. But it landed like a crack in the air. As the interview continued, her interruptions multiplied, small, precise needles. Each time I began to answer, she would add a comment, a correction that wasn't one, a reminder of some irrelevant incident from years ago dressed up as professional context. And yet, I held my ground. I didn't raise my voice, didn't defend what didn't need defending. I spoke facts. I stayed composed. That was my quiet rebellion. Then came the problem set, a technical scenario we were all meant to solve on paper, a fair test of logic and process. I wrote quickly, the rhythm of numbers and reasoning calming me. Around me, pens scratched softly. The man beside me asked for an extra sheet. The woman at the end chewed her lip, frowning over her code. When I finished, I placed my solution on the table, clear, precise, correct. A senior manager, one of the observers, picked it up. He scanned it for a moment, eyes darting across the figures. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not kind, not cruel, just dismissive, as though something in it amused him. Then, with a slow, casual motion, he folded the paper once and tore it cleanly in half. The sound was soft but final. I stared at the halves lying limp on the table. No one spoke. The other candidates shifted uncomfortably. I could feel Curran's gaze on me now, not gloating, but watchful, waiting. He said nothing to explain himself, no feedback, no reason. Just the silent assumption that my work didn't deserve to exist. And in that silence, I felt every invisible weight women carry in rooms like that. The need to stay polite when you want to scream. The quiet erasure of competence masked as procedure. I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my notebook and drew a line, not on my paper, but in my mind. A line that separated who I used to be from who I would become after this. I picked up my pen again and began to write, not equations this time, but names. Every face that looked away, every mouth that smirked, every pair of eyes that avoided mine when the paper tore. Because silence, too, is a kind of record. The questions moved on. Someone else spoke. The conversation resumed, and the rhythm of polite professionalism filled the air again. But beneath it all, I could feel the shift. Something had cracked, not in me, but in them, the recognition, however small, that I had not broken. The boardroom, with its perfect light and gleaming walls, had become a stage where the truth revealed itself not in words, but in who dared to meet my gaze when the test was over. When it ended, I gathered my things slowly, stacking my torn paper neatly, as if it still mattered. My chair scraped softly against the floor as I stood. No one offered a word. Not even her. The corridor outside the boardroom was cold, the kind of sterile chill that hums from white lights and air conditioning vents. My heels echoed against the tiles, sharp and hollow, a sound that matched the pulse behind my ribs. I stepped aside, trying to collect myself, the taste of humiliation still bitter on my tongue. I took out my phone, half to ground myself, half to pretend I had something to do while the others stayed behind in that bright glass room. Then it buzzed. A new email from a vendor I'd worked with last quarter. The subject line read, "Lila, care to explain?" I frowned, thumb hesitating before I opened it. Inside was a forwarded message, one that looked as though it had come from my own address. The tone was venomous. "She's a liability in heels," it read, referring to a female client, followed by a snide remark about her budget skills. My heart dropped. The words were coarse, petty, nothing like my professional tone. It wasn't just a fabrication. It was designed to destroy credibility, to make me look unhinged. For a moment, I couldn't move. The blood in my body seemed to still, replaced by a deep, quiet disbelief. I scrolled to the bottom, to the timestamp. My eyes widened. The email had been sent at 9:42 a.m. I looked at my watch. At 9:42, I had been sitting in the Helios lobby, waiting by that dying fern, the receptionist's voice a faint hum in the background. I hadn't even logged into my account that morning. I opened the metadata attachment the vendor had included. He was thorough, almost apologetic. There it was, clear as day. The sending IP address didn't match my device. The digital signature was wrong. Whoever had done this had gone beyond casual cruelty. It was planned. The corridor suddenly felt narrower, the walls pressing closer. Through the glass, I could see the silhouettes inside the boardroom. Corinne was still there, standing beside the manager who had torn my work apart. They were talking in low tones, confident, unaware. I breathed once, slow and deliberate. Then I walked back toward the door. When I stepped inside, the conversation faltered. The room went quiet, like a stage when the curtain falls unexpectedly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'd like to see the internal session feed for this morning," I said. Someone laughed softly, uncertain. Corinne tilted her head, her expression composed. Curious. "Lila," she said lightly, "I think this isn't really the time." "It is," I said. My tone was even, but it carried a weight that silenced the rest of the table. A message was sent from my account during this interview. "I want to verify network access logs." The HR representative shifted in his seat, caught between protocol and discomfort. "We can check that later," he murmured. "No," I said.
Now.
For a moment, no one moved. Then, perhaps sensing something larger brewing, the IT assistant who'd been recording the session hesitated, then turned his laptop toward the central screen. The boardroom lights dimmed slightly as the internal feed appeared. There it was. The playback began with the moment I entered the room. My chair, angled subtly away from the others. The interruptions, each one from Corinne, smiling as she spoke. The moment my paper was torn. Every detail replayed in quiet, undeniable clarity. The truth, stripped of charm or pretense. I felt my throat tighten but kept my expression neutral. My eyes didn't leave the screen. Then came the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The door opened. Adrian Hart, the division head, also my fiancé, entered. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. He was tall, composed, his expression unreadable, the faint smell of rain clinging to his coat. But there was something in his eyes, a knowing, a grim purpose, that told me this was not coincidence. Without a word, he placed a folder on the table. "Continue," he said to the IT assistant. Inside the folder were printouts, IT logs, edit histories, timestamps from internal systems. My name appeared in some, but not where it mattered. His tone was quiet, controlled. "We traced the forged email through the Helios internal proxy," he said. "It originated from an active employee login." Corinne shifted in her seat. Her knuckles whitened where her hands gripped the table's edge. Adrian's eyes didn't move from the papers as he continued. "The session tied to that activity was your account, Corinne." He placed another sheet before her, screenshots, metadata, internal chat records. "There's also this." The screen changed. A chat log appeared, words glowing stark against the white background. "Derail her early. Easy win." The timestamp was 9:41 a.m. Silence fell so thick it seemed to smother the room. No one moved. No one dared to. Corinne's lips parted, but no sound came out. The faint color drained from her face. Around the table, every polite mask slipped into stunned discomfort. Someone coughed. Another looked down, studying the table as though it had suddenly become fascinating. I stood very still, hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Adrian either. My eyes were fixed on the reflection in the glass wall, myself, steady, silent, unbroken. In that mirrored surface, I saw two versions of me, the woman they had tried to erase and the one who refused to vanish. No shouting followed. No argument. Just the soft shuffle of papers, the sound of breathing, the quiet rearrangement of power in the room. Truth doesn't always explode. Sometimes it lands gently, devastating in its calm. I thought of all the mornings Corinne and I had shared growing up, the rivalry, the comparisons, the subtle cruelty that had always worn a sister's smile. And now, here it was, the end of it, unfolding in front of strangers. Adrian closed the folder. The room remained still. I felt no victory, only clarity. The silence that followed was not the kind that comes from defeat, it was the kind that comes from recognition. The air in the boardroom had changed. The same people who had looked away before now avoided my eyes for a different reason: shame. I didn't need to raise my voice. Truth had spoken for me, line by line in the logs, timestamp by timestamp. The damage was done, not to me, but to them, to the illusion that I could be bent out of shape, folded into someone else's failure. When HR stepped in, their tone was almost apologetic. They spoke softly, measured, as if afraid I might shatter. I didn't. I had already broken in smaller, quieter ways before this. In every overlooked meeting, every interrupted sentence, every uncredited solution that bore my fingerprints, but not my name. This moment was different. This time, I wasn't the one being dismissed. I was being acknowledged. They offered me a contract before the room had even cleared. Permanent position. Excellent benefits. A title that sounded expensive. Then came the offer of a corner office, the one with glass walls and skyline views, the kind they gave to people they wanted to be seen. I smiled politely, but my answer came easily. "I'll take a desk on the build floor," I said. They looked puzzled, as if I were refusing a crown. But I didn't want to look down on anyone. I wanted to be where things were made, where the hum of the 3D printers met the tap of code being written, where engineers argued over circuits and laughed over bad coffee. The build floor was real. It was where truth stayed visible, unpolished and loud. A corner office could hide too much. When I left the building, Dublin's sky had turned to evening, that soft indigo hour when glass reflects streetlight and everything feels like a held breath. My reflection in the window wasn't triumphant. It was steady. I had lost something too, illusions about loyalty, about love, about who stands beside you when the world sharpens its knives. But clarity, I realized, was its own kind of victory. I walked to a small restaurant 2 blocks away, the one with uneven chairs and perfect soup. The waiter recognized me from weeks ago, smiled, and asked if I wanted the usual. I nodded. The city outside glowed with quiet indifference. No one cared about the storm that had passed inside those glass walls. That anonymity was a comfort. When the bill came, €42, I didn't hesitate. I paid it myself, every cent earned, every decision mine. There was something ceremonial in the act, not the meal itself, but the independence behind it. No one had bought my victory. No one could. Later, at home, I changed into soft clothes, opened the window, and lit a small candle. The flame trembled, alive and honest. My notebook lay open on the desk, pages of scribbles, crossed-out dreams, fragments of plans that had once seemed far away. I didn't write much that night. Just one line. "I will not be erased." The ink sank slowly into the page. It wasn't a vow shouted to the world. It was a whisper meant for the woman I had almost forgotten to be. The one who stayed silent too long, who thought humility meant invisibility, who mistook endurance for acceptance. Now she had a voice. Now she had proof. And tomorrow, she would return, not to the boardroom, not to the corner office, but to the floor where the real work began.